Good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to everyone joining us here today. It's another special edition of the Climate Group's LinkedIn Live series. And of course, welcome to everyone who is listening to us on the 50 Shades of Green podcast. We're covering both angles today. So it's fantastic to have a wonderful panel together. For those who listen to 50 Shades of Green podcast, to those who have listened to a LinkedIn live stream of us before, this is part of a special series of what we are doing where we are uncovering, lifting the curtain into very different areas of climate action and finding out the stories, finding out the people, finding out all the different issues that we can delve into and uncover. Now, it must be said, this is the first one that we are doing in 2025. And in case you've missed it, quite a lot has happened in the last few weeks, especially when it comes to US politics. So no doubt that will have a big influence in terms of the conversations we might be having today. What we're really trying to do in this series, and will be over the coming weeks, is just make sure that we can have a conversation about the work that's happened so far in many different areas and get some insight into where we're going to be looking to in the future. So without further ado, let's kick off this episode. We are talking about electrification, electric vehicles today. And so we are really delighted to be joined by Commissioner Matthew Baker, from the California Public Utilities Commission. We've got our very own Angela Barranco, Executive Director of Climate Group North America, and our resident expert, Ricky Parker, Senior Manager of Transportation Programs at Climate Group. So, Angela, let me just kick it off first of all. I mentioned very different times. It's a really important opportunity for all of us to look at the landscape and look at where we can do the best work. I'd love you to sort of give some thoughts and reflections as to where we are, where you see us today.
Well, thanks, Adam, and thank you, Commissioner Baker, and thanks, Ricky, for joining us today. I think it's going to be a great conversation. It's an interesting time, to say the least, for the first week of a new administration, for a new year, for a new era for climate action. What I would say most of all that has really been a takeaway for me in the last few days is how much there is consistency and constancy for people's momentum and goals. We're hearing from companies from across the world who do business in the United States, and they're going ahead with their sustainability plans. They have 10, 20, 30-year projections in terms of electrification, in terms of their purchasing materials, in terms of their, all of their supply chains. And, the politics will change, the context will change, but it really feels like their commitment to climate change continues unabated. And so we're really thrilled to have Commissioner Baker on here to talk about some of the brass tacks of getting things done. But so far, I feel really confident that we're going to keep putting points on the board in terms of climate momentum. And so we'll see what the rest of the year brings.
And for those who are watching the video version of this, the background behind Angela is real. She is in San Francisco. That is the actual Golden Gate Bridge behind her. There is a reason for that because, of course, Angela was on a panel with Commissioner Baker last week on Friday, speaking about many of the things that we're going to talk about today. Commissioner Baker, it's a great opportunity to segue into your story. First of all, it would be lovely maybe if you could just tell us a little bit about the California Public Utilities Commission for those who might not fully understand this world of work that you are in.
Yeah, so the Public Utilities Commission was set up 100 years ago by progressive reformers to regulate monopolies. And in most parts of the world, electric utilities are monopolies because you only want to have one set of lines going down your street. Water and sewer are monopolies. Natural gas to your house is a monopoly because you're not going to have two pipes coming in. And so our job is really to, if you think of the utilities, what their job is to provide power 24/7, make sure that it's, reliable, that it gets to, they operate the system, they finance the system. And what the Public Utilities Commission does is, because we say, hey, you're a monopoly, is we regulate their prices and we tell them what they can or cannot build to charge ratepayers.
And so
in California,
please carry on.
And in California and in many other states, the Public Utilities Commission is where a lot of the rubber of decarbonization hits the road. So, it's our job to make sure in California that the grid gets to be zero emission, before 2040. It's our job to make sure that the infrastructure is there as we're starting to electrify transportation, buildings, and industry. So, when somebody goes to plug in, it's our job to make sure that the power is there, and equally important that it is affordable, and that it's affordable enough so that they'll want to switch over from petroleum to electric. So I'll stop there. I could talk more about, our intersection with decarbonization as you want.
I'd love to dig in a bit further. I find it, California rightly has a reputation as a leader when it comes to electrification, vehicle electrification. It'd be great to hear your reflections on why do you think that is, and from your point of view, when you're looking at regulation, does that present opportunities, challenges? How might it be different for a very developed electrification arena as you see it in California?
Yeah, so California got a head start on the rest of the country. I mean, there are other countries that have that are further ahead, like Norway, and I would even argue China is now further ahead. But in terms of places in the United States that were able to jump ahead for electrification of transportation, we've been out front, and we were out front predominantly because early on our Air Resources Board set pretty stringent air pollution goals. So initially, what helped drove electrification was these air pollution goals, which later became climate goals as well. We also had policies in place to try to externalize the costs of, combustion engines, and use we have a cap and trade program, and we have a low carbon fuel standard, which early on allowed the use of credits to fund electric charging stations. And more recently, we have, we have provided incentives in terms of electricity rates for the electrification of vehicles. So that's kind of how we got here. I would say the challenges are, one is we are still behind where we want to be. We're much further ahead in decarbonizing the grid than we are on decarbonizing transportation. So we do have a ways to go. When you're adding, when you're 2 or 3xing the amount of power that you're going to be selling for electrification, you're going to have to expand the grid. You're going to have to modernize the grid. That's going to cost a lot of money. So those are also challenges. And we are doing this all in a time where climate change has is kind of hitting us in the face in the form of massive wildfires that are, sometimes caused by electric equipment, but certainly wiping out electrical equipment wherever they go through. And all of this adds to, the cost of electricity, which is really important to keep down if you're going to electrify your grid. Now, those are the challenges. I would say, like the wind at our back, so to speak, on electrification and cost is the more that we're able to electrify, the more we're able to sell more electricity for beneficial electrification, like transportation, the more we're able to take these costs and spread them out over more and more electrons. And the more we can electrify, that can actually help drive down the unit price of electricity. So we really want to try to get out of a bad cycle and get into a more virtuous cycle where we're making investments, we're hardening the grid, and we're adding new electric load to help pay for that so that we can smooth out the cost increases. And so people can make the investment in an electric vehicle and go, okay, great. I can see how this is going to be less expensive than petroleum for the foreseeable future.
Ricky, I'd love to pick your brains on the wider scope of all of this. So first of all, great to hear you speak a little bit about the EV100 initiative and what that is, but also just in terms of of what Commissioner Baker was saying there. There's some really interesting challenges. What sort of what tactics can be taken to try and overcome those? Where are your priority places right now?
Yeah, so on EV100, so EV100 is kind of the primary thrust of climate groups transport work globally, and so it is a network of corporate fleets that have committed to electrifying all the vehicles in their fleet fairly rapidly. We have over 120 companies globally. About half of those are either headquartered in the U.S. or have a major presence in the U.S. Millions of vehicles committed across all these different companies, and so that does a couple things. On its own, that commitment drives a demand signal, right? And that is important for providing some certainty. Many of our members we work with to then advocate for policy changes globally. We have activities, policy activities in Europe. We have policy activities here in the U.S. We really believe that supply side regulations like the Air Resources Board's ZEV sales mandates, like federal emission standards, are quite effective at kind of stimulating vehicle supply along with that demand signal that our members provide. And so that feels like a very kind of, natural bit of work. But in general, our members are kind of about, the demand signal, the supply side regulations, and then kind of doing the work to get the cars on the road. Right. And so a lot of what Commissioner Baker was saying, we are hearing from our members that they are actively sorting these questions out. Not all fleets look the same. A lot of them don't. I assume there's going to be a lot more kind of like centrally charged truck fleets. We have a lot of like biotech companies who have thousands of vehicles because of their sales reps, and they need to figure out how to help them charge them at home. And not all of their sales reps live in single family houses. And so the challenges of charging at multifamily housing becomes a challenge for fleets, which people may not expect. Or if people are on the road and kind of traveling long distances, the range anxiety that people often feel, that is a challenge they have to sort out. And these companies are doing that work. In terms of the, tactics, some of it is we just got to figure it out, right? What you see, the benefit of leadership is these are overcomable challenges, and the companies that get in first are the ones to get better at it. The other thought I have is like, we've got to build a lot of new stuff and we got to really collaborate well. And so one of the things that, I really value Commissioner Baker's perspective on this is that like electric charging depots are a level of power for, especially for heavy duty trucks, that is almost unimaginable, right? I mean, there's numbers that like we're talking compared to the Empire State Building, compared to stadiums, right? It is an unimaginable amount of energy to charge like Class 8 tractor trailer electric trucks. And we have members through our EV100 Plus initiative who are doing that. We're partnering with developers to build these. And they need so much power on site. And sometimes that is not power off the grid. Sometimes you're generating power on site. But we're going to have to kind of try and fail a little bit. And I think that is really where the collaboration between the public and the private sector becomes incredibly important, is that kind of willingness to just start building infrastructure, whether that is a charging depot with a generator on site, whether that is, the transmission and distribution lines, which we want to do carefully for all the ratepayer reasons that Commissioner Baker was talking about. But I think the collaboration with the fleets, with the developers, with the regulators, to just get out and start building is absolutely critical.
Angela, it feels like there's a tipping point that we've got to, where actually many consumers, many fleet owners, as Ricky mentioned, they really want to get to that destination. Electrification isn't something that's being put on people. People want to go in that direction, but there are hurdles. There are bureaucratic hurdles. There are permitting hurdles. We've talked about this a lot at events like Climate Week NYC or the US Climate Action Summit, that actually bringing together the private and public sector is a way of overcoming that. But I'd love to get your perspective. Like, what are the main areas that we need to be focusing right now to make sure that those hurdles can be overcome?
I love that. And actually, I'm going to credit Commissioner Baker for one of my statements, because I'm directly stealing from his comments at this amazing conference that we were at. Part of this is, we have to build it and it will come, right? And so we have to incentivize at all levels. I do want to give a shout out to the folks at Global Transmission, who hosted us at the Electric Vehicle Charging Infrastructure West conference. I know it's a mouthful, but they were just amazing people, like Commissioner Baker there, in conversation about exactly what you're talking about, Adam. So whether you're in multifamily housing, how do you ensure that each of those units have access that is appropriate, without perhaps having to wait for the utility to bring a massive amount of energy there. So they were talking about all sorts of ways to do individual chargers and ensure that the rate isn't sort of artificially jacked up for lots of other reasons, and that the consumer ultimately gets access as well as affordability to that. There were folks talking about how to use vehicles as sort of distributed batteries, right? There's all sorts of ways that there's a lot of innovation happening right now and folks thinking about that on the ground, because you're absolutely right. I don't think that there's any um, lag in the consumer side. Folks want their electric cars. They want them to be easy. They want to feel, as one of the participants said, like an abundance of charging, abundance of options, and so the I would say the point right now for us is really just deployment, right? Like we need to deploy as fast as possible, and this is the point that Commissioner Baker, actually turn it to you and have you offer this point as well, is to say, like, we just have to hurry up and do it, even if it's not quite in touch with the grid. If the grid is going to take some time to catch up, if the grid never catches up, we have to sort of get there, especially at the point source, to make sure that we're moving the transportation sector along and decarbonization as fast as possible. So I will pass it on to you, Commissioner Baker, talk a bit more about this, because I think it's a really important point.
Yeah, I'm not sure I could say it better than you did, Angela. I will, I will add that, it often will take, 3, 4, 5, sometimes 10 years to get the massive amounts of power to the places that we need them to do. And, we're not looking at Class A trucks right now. We're mostly, although we are at the ports, I shouldn't have said that. But we are definitely looking at a lot of, mid-duty trucks. We're looking at drayage trucks, which are, pull the same load as a Class A truck. And it will take building new transmission lines into some of these places to be able to get grid power there. And I think the point that that was made was, we need to be able to do it much sooner than that. So through some combination of policies that expedite the expansion of the grid and policies that promote on-site generation. And in some cases, this may be, on-site generation from some amount of, short-term temporary natural gas, because what we're doing is we are decarbonizing transportation. And we're also really significant reducing, by doing that, it will lead to very significant reductions in the kinds of pollutants that kill people, the particulates, the SOx, some of the NOx pollution. And so getting these dirty diesels off the road, electrifying them as quickly as possible has enormous benefits, even if the way we're doing it is not wholly decarbonized for the next couple of years until the clean electrons from the grid can get there. I think those are the kinds of things that we need to do, and that advocates need to be looking at. So look at the overall carbon reductions of taking the diesel trucks off. Look at that. We need to get electrification happening today, not 5 or 10 years from now. And also make sure that we are doing everything that we can to expedite the grid connections to these areas so that we can get off of whatever short-term solutions we have, that we're backed into, so that we can electrify our fleets.
Canada's leadership role in this is so significant, it cannot be understated. Obviously, so many people know California. If it was a country, it would be the 5th largest economy in the world. And a lot of our work focuses on North America, but we also work with governments around the world. We work with companies around the world as well. Looking back over the last 10 years, specifically in the areas that you've been discussing today, if there was one big win, if there was one great example of where things have worked well, that maybe smaller, less developed economies could take inspiration from. I'm putting you on the spot here, but what would be the one message that you would share to those economies?
So so I assume you're talking about other states. Or you're talking about countries,
I would
or
say
both.
other states or their equivalents around the world, sort of subnational governments,
Okay.
absolutely.
Yeah. So subnationals. I think I would just say the most important thing you could do is encourage the electricity providers to increase their sales and give them the incentives to increase their sales for the purposes of electrifying transportation. That would be number one. I think number two is, policies based on air pollution that look at, if you're another state, you could adopt the California Clean Cars Standard, which also helps to drive forward electrification. And then finally, if there was a way to develop something that could look like cap and trade or a carbon tax or a low carbon fuel standard, things like that can harness market powers to put investment in the electrified side of things. California got a huge head start on charging infrastructure because we allowed the use of low carbon standard fuel credits to go towards electrification. And so there was an incentive for essentially oil companies to work with companies like ChargePoint and EVgo to fund, to use their credits to fund charging stations throughout the state. So there isn't a one size fits all for any jurisdiction, but I think something that gives the electric utilities an incentive to sell more electrons for electrification. Something around tailpipe standards or fuel efficiency standards that help create an incentive for manufacturers and sellers to push electric vehicles, and then something where you can have some of the incumbent sectors, whether it's transportation or heating or industry, help pay for the new infrastructure that's going to be the future, that's going to electrify. And I think those are the three big elements of any strategy for electrification of transportation.
Ricky, I'd love your take on that question as well. When you're looking at the experience in perhaps California compared to other subnationals around the world, are you seeing some similarities, some differences in the experience of fleet managers in similar organizations?
Yeah, I don't want to totally just restate what Commissioner Baker said, but I think incentives drive behavior, right? And regulations are powerful incentives, right? So I think that's what you see when you look globally, when you look at the fact that the fleets of ours that are most ambitious in the States are often the ones with a large presence in Europe. And because they were responding to the regulatory incentives in Europe, they got pretty good at deploying EVs. And so they were pretty confident that they could do it in the States. And so I think you see that from California to other states. People respond to incentives. Regulatory incentives are really powerful tools. I think the other thing I will note, and Commissioner Baker mentioned drayage trucks. So I just want to point out the other thing here is do what you can when you can, right? And so going after Class 8 in terms of long haul, really, really hard right now. But drayage trucks don't drive very far. And so maybe we can start to electrify those. And you see regulations in California that are targeting the types of vehicle uses that we can probably electrify now. And I think that is an obvious lesson, is that this is a really big, hard challenge. We do not need to do it all at once. We can identify the places where EVs are good use cases right now, and we should kind of create the incentives and the regulations to target those uses. And the harder stuff, the longer haul stuff, we will figure out. But you got to get started somewhere. And I think California's done a really good job of kind of picking the fights that they know you can win first.
Angela,
I would also,
please.
Well, I was just going to say, even at the municipal level or the county level, there's lots that can be done. I think there are high visibility, applications such as police cruisers, which are ideal for electrification because they're often idling. They use a lot of fuel idling. They're in a confined area. For the most part, they'd be perfect. School buses are the same way. They're only used a couple hours a day. You could use the batteries. We have a project of a school depot in Oakland, where the batteries actually then also serve as backup for the grid when school's out. I think there's a lot of twofers and threefers and fourfers that we should be just picking off step by step, and that's how we win.
Angela, I want to pick up on something you said earlier, which is, the big thing that we need to be doing now is just getting stuff done. And it sounds good and we can all agree with it, but it is sometimes easier said than done. And I just love to get your perspective, especially now within the context of, a different political environment. Where do you think the most effective power should lie in terms of pushing things forward? Where might those bottlenecks be over the next few years?
I think there's going to be a lot of rhetoric. There's going to be a lot of noise in the machine. And I think what was so exciting about seeing all these amazing communities coming together at this conference, talking about the deployment of their particular technologies or the problems and the challenges that they were facing, is that it's all really, really happening at that local level. And so I do believe there is something to be said for, and picking up a little bit on what Ricky said and also what Commissioner Baker said, companies are already self-interested in figuring out the technology and the utility barriers and all the things that it takes to get heavy duty trucks going. They're already working on it, right? And so they're going to keep working on it because it's in the best interest of their bottom line. Communities are already invested in reducing the terrible air pollutants that the transportation sector, especially heavy duty, but also things like drayage. I love that we're talking drayage. It's my favorite, very dirty end of life trucks that are just, really impactful in lots of communities across the country, across the world. Right. And they are prime targets, not just because, we're talking about climate goals and sort of more this esoteric, thing that we were talking about in terms of like global stuff. It's really impactful to everyday people in real communities, who, kids have to breathe that air, whose jobs are relying on their being able to get out of bed every day and go to work. So I feel like I'm really excited to see how local communities really rise up to this climate challenge and are already doing the work today to get this done. And so whether that's, different types of charging infrastructure, looking at their community specific needs, I think is really important.
And I'm going to give the final word to Commissioner Baker. Similar question. It's that magic wand movement. If there's one area who could push harder, if there's one audience that you want to step up higher than they've ever done before, where would you direct that magical power?
Well, I am most interested in fleet electrification. And I see a lot of interest on the the manufacturers seem like they're stepping up. Many of the fleet operators are stepping up, and in California, the place where we're hurting is just making sure that the grid and the grid connections are there on time. So if I had a magic wand, I don't know that it would be helpful to move the utilities because I think they have plenty of incentives to go and get it. But my magic wand would probably be things around that create the consensus that we need to extend these lines, not in 7-8 years, but in 7-8 months. And that we're also okay with short-term solutions until that happens. Like it is a magic moment where in California where everything's there but the electricity. And so let's not waste it. That's a very selfish one, state specific, but that's my wish.
Brilliant, thank you. And it's really interesting because there's so much to do. I think we've really uncovered the scale of the challenge, but clearly progress has been made, and it's been really exciting hearing from all of you on the different ways that that's coming through in reality. We are at time now But there will be many other opportunities, podcasts, events, and all the rest of it coming from Climate Group discussing this subject and many, many more. I want to say a massive thank you to Commissioner Baker for joining us today. As always, thank you, Angela Barranco, for giving us your insight. And Ricky Parker, it's been fantastic getting your expertise joining us as well. So thanks everyone for joining us, and look forward to joining a new group of people in a week or two's time when we come for the next subject that will be under discussion. So thanks everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, Adam.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
See ya.
Bye, guys.
Bye.